going to
Yeah,
do
it
that so
doesn't
they're
seem
up
like
at
I
top?
can,
Can you do that?
apparently. That was the plan. So what I'm
Okay.
gonna do is I'm gonna mute it. Okay, first off, if you want to see the speaker, you should have an option on your, if you're on PCs and stuff, if you move the cursor into the upper right-hand corner, there is a view button. If you click that and switch to speaker view, you will see pretty much almost the whole screen will be the speaker.
Oh,
You can then look behind them to see what their house looks like. If you leave it on gallery view, you'll see everyone. Usually there's a yellow rectangle around the person who's speaking. Since I can't seem to make people co-hosts, which was my plan and the way Zoom said it would work, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mute everybody, and then you'll be able to unmute yourself. So unmute yourself when you want to talk, and you will move to the top of the list.
okay, that sounds good.
Okay, so
Don't-
Keep getting the telephone. It keeps coming in over and over and over. The green
What?
telephone icon.
Oh,
Oh, Darlene, that's nice. Okay, well, why don't we start?
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
I'm gonna.
okay. I'm going to mute everybody. So hang on. Then Michael,
You're gonna mute me too. I'll.
unmute yourself.
Okay. All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome. As you know, tonight's meeting is going to be a panel discussion on reforming the criminal justice system. Some people refer to it as the criminal injustice system. I heard somebody just switch the emphasis without changing the name. He said, I'm going to talk about the criminal justice system, and it is criminal. It is, I think we all know, it is, if you're a person of color, you have a real problem. The panel, I don't think we could have gotten a better panel than and I'm so grateful to the three panelists for giving us their time tonight. Dave Arenberg, as I'm sure everyone knows, is our state attorney in Palm Beach County. Carrie Hawat is our public defender. And Micah Kubik down in Miami is the executive director of the ACLU in Florida. And a lot of fun to watch and hear. He's spoken to our club before. And before we begin, I'd just like to read the preface to a book that I think is maybe the best book I've read in the last 10 or 15 years. Let's see, the copyright was, 2010. Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. And I couldn't find in the book the point where she said it, but somewhere she talked about walking around. She was in the Bay Area out in California, and there were stickers up for a meeting that said the drug war is the new Jim Crow. And she said, that's you're just going to turn people off if you say something extreme like that. Well, she started doing the research, and then that's the title that she gave to her book, the new Jim Crow. And it is, if you haven't read it, the research in it is absolutely incredible. The footnotes, I mean, the footnotes are about a third of the book, it seems like. But she says, this book is not for everyone. I have a specific audience in mind, people who care deeply about racial justice, but who, for any number of reasons, do not yet appreciate the magnitude of the crisis faced by communities of color as a result of mass incarceration. In other words, I'm writing this book for people like me, the person I was 10 years ago. I'm also writing it for another audience, those who have been struggling to persuade their friends, neighbors, relatives, teachers, co-workers, or political representatives that something is eerily familiar about the way our criminal justice system operates, something that looks and feels a lot like an era we were supposedly left behind, but have lacked the facts and the data to back up their claims. It's my hope and prayer that this book empowers you and allows you to speak your truth with greater conviction, credibility, and courage. Last, but definitely not least, I'm writing this book for all those trapped within America's latest caste system. You may be locked up or locked out of mainstream society, but you're not forgotten. So I don't know whether we're going to begin with Dave as the person whose office is charged with prosecuting offenders, Carrie, who's defending them, or Micah on who's going to be able to speak on the. Sorry about that. So, Dave, do you want to lead off? You're muted, Dave. Dave, you're
Sorry
muted.
about that.
There you go. Okay, good.
Yeah, there we go. Hey, it's good to see everyone. You know, one of the things that our community has that most others have not is that we're all part of the MacArthur Foundation Safety and Justice Challenge. We were chosen after a selection process to work to try to reduce the racial disparities in our jail system, to rethink jails, because there is a concern that there are too many people waiting for trial in our jails who have not committed crimes, but are there because they can't afford to make bail. So we have tried to enact some reforms. Ironically, one of the reforms we tried was a matrix, which would standardize a system of bail and make sure that only the people who were more of a threat to the community would have cash bail, and others would get what's called OR or SOR, on release on your own recognizance or supervised release. And this was a matrix that was suggested by the experts within the MacArthur Foundation. So we tried it in our community. And after we tried it for a while, there was an evaluation, and they found that indeed that more people were released from pretrial release than before, but the racial disparities within the jail system was worse than before. So these are tricky issues. And so we stopped using that matrix, and now we're trying to find something better. But sometimes when you are well-meaning, and sometimes when you have experts that come up with some proposals, they tend to backfire. And so that's why it's good for us to keep an open mind to try to listen and understand, because our goal is to make our community the safest it could possibly be. One of the things we've done is to reduce the direct file rate of juveniles direct filed into adult court, and to try to rethink the jails, our local county jail, which is right now at about half capacity. So we do not have an overcrowding problem at the jail. But obviously, we're always open to reforms to do things better. Sometimes the reforms don't work, but we're part of a system that very few other circuits are, to try to work together to make it a fair, more equitable criminal justice system.
I should have also said in the format, it's kind of as you're speaking, either Carrie or Micah may have comments on what you're saying. We have a chat window where if people are familiar with that, you can send questions, but I guess we ought to leave the talking to the panelists until they've finished. So sorry to interrupt you, Dave.
No, I'm done.
Okay. Carrie, did you have?
Hi, everybody. It is good to see you. I'm sorry I'm in the dark. I am actually at my office, and I never get the right lighting on these Zoom things. I'm at my office with a blanket because it's freezing in here.
Ah,
So this is, you know, an important topic to me in terms of criminal justice reform and specifically with regards to racial inequities. I have been practicing law for 37 years. Gosh, that makes me feel old. And, you know, just as a personal observation, but the data I believe will bear this out, that while I think there are better intentions, we have louder racial animus right now, but in terms of percentage of people who I think are really driven by racial animus, I do think it's less. I have more confidence that we are making progress there. But in the criminal justice system, we have greater racial disparity than we did 35 years ago. We have more people of color in prison. We have more people of color in prison for longer periods of time. So as we talk about criminal justice reform, I guess what I would like to say, what, you know, is we have such a punitive system. We day in and day out throw away people's lives, not just for a year, not just for 2 years, but for 20 years, 30 years, for their entire life. We day in and day out brand people, particularly people of color, as being beyond redemption. Now, what we see today, you know, I totally back up what Michael said about Michelle Alexander's book. It's great. It is eye-opening. When I read it, I question sort of the cause and effect, right? That in terms of, so her basic premise is the war on drugs was racially motivated. I think we can argue that premise. What we can't argue is that it definitely had a racially disparate impact on people, families, and communities in such an enormous way in terms of incarcerating people of color. And, you know, that is sort of 70s, 80s stuff, right? So today, what we're seeing in the criminal justice system is either people who suffered from much of that, or their children who grew up with parents who were incarcerated. I always say one of the most chilling statistics to me is the one that says by age 14, the study that said by age 14, approximately 25% of African American children have experienced a parent in prison. I mean, that's just chilling, right? Because what it says is we're just going to have generational impacts. You cannot take a parent and imprison them and not expect it to have an impact on children. Our sentencing structure, while crime has been going down for the last 20 years, our sentencing structure has increased. We have increased penalties. We have really very, very harsh sentencing. We have mandatory sentencing that does not allow for mercy or redemption. And so our problems are getting worse, despite, I think, there being more people sort of recognizing the need to address racial inequities. Our prisons, I believe the disparity is greater. Our county jail, the disparity of detainees pre-trial is greater. As Dave was saying, you know, we got this MacArthur money to work on reducing racial disparity. And while we're all at the table and we're all trying things, we are not succeeding. So what does that tell you? Where is it coming from? Is it coming from implicit bias? Or is it coming from a legal structure that is so embedded that we can't escape the disparity that results? And one of the things with, one of the issues I see is that with our sentencing structure, because our penalties multiply drastically based on a person's history. And that makes sense to a lot of folks, right? You say, well, you should be punished more harshly if you've continued to commit crimes. But it doesn't take into account the fact that if you have been punished before, you've lost your civil rights, you've lost your job, you've made it difficult to get housing, and you have put up all these barriers to success, that we've increased the chance that you're going to be involved in the criminal justice system again. So we increase the chance and then we multiply the penalty. So I struggle with this. We struggle with it all the time. And I think that the pandemic is bringing to light some things, what we are seeing in terms of the impact of the pandemic, right, on our poor communities and our communities of color, are the exact same impact we're seeing on those communities of our criminal justice system. The parallels to me are pretty interesting. And it's lack of appropriate education, lack of appropriate medical care, lack of trust in authority. And I think the lack of trust in authority is only going to grow as racial disparity grows and inequities grow, because we're seeing it. We see it, right? There is not a sense, what I see from my clients of color, that the courts are a place where they're going to get a fair shake. They didn't see it with their parents. They haven't seen it with their brothers and sisters. Why would they think they're going to now? And so I say, ultimately, the issue with regards to racial disparity in the criminal justice system and the harshness with which we treat people is undermining public safety. Because if there is not confidence in our justice system, if there is not confidence in our laws, then there's not respect for our laws and there's not respect for our system. And that undermines public safety ultimately. And so we wonder why some of this is getting worse in terms of, sort of crime or sort of crimes getting worse. And I think we can look back and say, the 19-year-old today who is carrying a gun in a poor community and gets involved in a violent crime that we're going to lock up for the rest of his life is the child who was raised by the parent who went to prison for a small amount of drugs for an extraordinary amount of time, who then the family became homeless, was unable to get benefits, unable to live in housing. So it's just adding, it continues to add up. I think that there's no question the disparity exists. There's no question the inequities exist. The big question is, what do we do about it? What do we do about it? And I'm telling you, this is, I wish I had the answer. The answers I come up with, one is obviously, I think, changing our sentencing laws. I just think if we cannot make room for mercy in our justice system, we aren't going to make progress. And when I say make room for mercy, we have the number of crimes that have mandatory minimums and extraordinary mandatory minimums have grown and grown over the last 20 years. You know, the interesting thing is, so Democrats, you know, we might be a little on the liberal side. The interesting thing is conservative think tanks are joining us in this call because it is shown it doesn't work. You know, long sentences do, all it is doing is incapacitating huge sections of our community. It doesn't have the effect of deterring others, because really, if you're not deterred by the thought of going to prison for 3 years, are you any more deterred by the thought of going to prison for 10 years or 15 years? I think not. Nobody wants to go to prison. They don't want to go to prison for 6 months. But somehow we've gotten it in our mind that the harsher we sentence people, there's going to be some benefit to that. And we haven't seen it at all. One of the good things that have happened in recent years is that juveniles who were sentenced to life in prison for crimes committed while they were juveniles became entitled to new sentencing hearings and review after being in prison for lengthy periods of time. And it has been one of the most joyful things I've been involved in the last couple of years, is doing these sentencing hearings and seeing these people who, against all odds, went to prison when they were 16 years old. We had one that went to prison when he was 15 years old. It was now 25, 30 years later that he was getting a new sentencing hearing. And it has, when I say joyful because first of all, we've gotten lots of them out and they're doing well. We've got programs in place to help them get on their feet. They have been 90% people of color. And part of the joy has been to see the resilience, to see that spirits haven't died and haven't been crushed, that hope has stayed alive, and that despite having committed really horrendous crimes, they are not horrendous people. And, you know, I think we can take a lesson and say, look, we don't need to lock people up for the rest of their life. We can actually punish folks and we can provide paths to redemption. And it works. It works on just a basic humanity level, and it works for the safety of our community and for rebuilding our families and our homes. So, you know, I get depressed sometimes when I see how some folks, you know, lives have been thrown away. And then I get hopeful when I see there's potential for change. And if we can use these stories to convince people we do not have to sacrifice lives in prison, that people are, as Brian Stevenson says, one of my favorite people, are more than the worst thing they ever did. And we just have to be able to see that and see people as whole people who can be among us. So anyway, as you can see, I feel strong about these issues.
There are a couple of things in chat, Michael. First of all, tonight's forum is not the set. It's when we all vote, and it's West Palm and Delray candidates.
Oh,
Here's a question.
Yeah, I
Why
was
did
just-
the bail system not work? Was it due to prejudice?
And Dave may have some thoughts about this. Well, first, you know, monetary bail is, you know, is kind of the issue that that is often the problem, right? Because poor people can't make bond, rich people can. We see it all of the time. And so the idea was maybe that's the reason for the racial disparity in our pretrial detainees. So the hope was, well, the thought was maybe what are called risk assessments. Maybe in place of monetary bail, if we do risk assessments and assess somebody's risk to public safety, we can, if the risk is low, because we know there are many low risk people in jail, if the risk is low, we can release without monetary bail. So the reason it failed, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that it relies almost exclusively on static factors like prior criminal history, drug abuse. So those kinds of things under these risk assessment algorithms keep people in jail. And those are factors that we know have racial inequities built into them. So when we tried the risk assessment, while I was on the fence about it because I knew there were studies that showed they could increase racial disparity, I still felt like, let's try something to get away from the monetary bail system that does keep poor people in jail. So that what we found, though, as Dave said, is our racial disparity actually was increasing in the jail as a result of any reliance on the risk assessment instrument. Except we didn't rely totally on the risk assessment instrument. So, and there really is no way to measure the impact of implicit bias on decisions about pretrial release or sentencing even. And so does bias play a role? All the studies seem to indicate that it often can. It's not overt, it's not intentional. That's the nature of implicit bias. But if you've, ever taken like an implicit bias test or those things, there is a tendency for many to view people of color as more dangerous. And that certainly gets factored into the bail system.
Carrie, one of the things that you said before that really struck me, I mean, it was the way you stated it, the legal structure is so embedded that we can't escape the inequities and that are built into it. And when you say that the louder racial animus, but less racism, I have tremendous hope when I see the millennials walking around. I mean, the groups just across all races, But when they go to the party that night and they get busted, it's the black guy or girl who's going to end up in jail, most likely. And the way it was set up, and I mean, the war on drugs started under Nixon, and then well, actually, it started under Reagan, but I think under Nixon it was the tough on crime. These are neutral laws. It affects everybody except the ones that get nailed are the the people of color. And one of the things, and it ties into a question that someone put in the chat, is at one point in the book she says that that there's great discretion among prosecutors whether to go to federal court or state court, and I forget which is more strict. And it may vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and and maybe in Florida you're better off in federal court than in state court. I don't know, but it gives great discretion to the prosecutor to really, and I think they did studies where they found that white defendants were more likely pushed in the direction of the court system that was more lenient, and people of color went to the one that was more stringent. So I don't know.
I
The
don't know
question.
that there's that much, I think the sentencing difference between federal and state court really varies based on the crime. There's certain crimes that in federal court are much harsher sentencing and vice versa. But there is tremendous discretion, and Dave would certainly back this up. There's tremendous discretion that the prosecutor holds on making charging decisions and seeking enhanced sentencing. That is not something that that is discretion that rests solely with the prosecutor.
Here's the question from Beverly. Can you address the specifics of sentencing in Florida? Do you have life with parole, without parole, felony murder? Are there bills before the legislature now to address sentencing inequities?
So real quick, we do not have parole anymore. So it is, if somebody is sentenced to life, it's without parole, without any chance of release. Ever.
Wow.
Felony murder is the same crime as premeditated murder. So even though you're not intending to kill somebody and you're not the actual killer, you can be punished the same as the one who is. And there are bills, yes, with regards to legislative action to address some inequities, yes, but they never get anywhere in our legislative, given the legislative makeup. And frankly, this is what people often say, well, what can we do about it? I always say, tell your legislature to get off the be tough on crime to get reelected platform, because that's just an easy spiel for people who are campaigning to talk about, I'm going to be tough on crime,
right,
when there's no sense of what that means to people.
Right. Okay, well, why don't we bring on Micah?
Yeah.
Micah, if you tuned in late, is the executive director of the ACLU of Florida. And he's neither a prosecutor nor a defender, but he has a lot to say. Go ahead.
Well, thanks very much. Good evening, everyone. A pleasure to be with you again. I wish that we were not doing it on Zoom. I'm a little zoomed out myself. Maybe y'all feel the same way. I don't even want to watch the Mazda commercials anymore because their slogan is Zoom, Zoom. So I'm a little over it, but I'm still happy to be with you anyways. I would echo most of the comments that have already been made, and I will take just a little bit of pride in the fact that Michelle Alexander used to work for the ACLU. In fact, researched the book, The New Jim Crow, while she was working for the ACLU. So we can take a little pride, a little credit in that. So I think what I would say about the system overall this evening is just that I really think the system that we have is fundamentally broken. I think it is fundamentally broken. It does not mean that there are not good people who are trying to do a good job all up and down the system, but I think overall the system and the structure is fundamentally broken. And I think to prove that point, you need only look at the top line numbers. You need only look at the fact that across the state of Florida, there are 100,000 people in prison today. 100,000 people in this state who are in state prison today. And that is a number that has increased 1,000% over the last 40 years. The population of the state of Florida has increased, but it has only tripled over the same period of time, whereas the prison population in this state has increased by 1,000%. 1,000% since the 1970s, since the declaration of the war on drugs. And the biggest increases haven't happened of late. They happened earlier in that period, but then have held steady ever since. And I think that means that we are sending too many people to prison for too long. It's costing us too much money and not producing any real benefits to community safety in the meantime. Because let's be clear, over the last couple of years, the crime rate in Florida has fallen to historic lows. The crime rate is just about as low as it has ever been, and yet the number of people in prison is as high as it has ever been. And again, if you look at the timing of when those things happened, it is not true that the crime rate went down because people went to prison. Instead, these things work in completely different directions. And so I think there is a really serious problem for our state, for our communities, when crime is as low as it's ever been and the prison population is as high as it's ever been. We're spending $2.4 billion every year in order to keep 100,000 people in state prison without any real appreciable community safety benefit as a result. Now, you've probably heard about racial disparities at the national level. We've touched on them a little bit already tonight. And those racial disparities are acute and terrible, right? I mean, think about this. In the nation at large, African Americans make up 12% of the country's population, 12%. They make up 11% of the drug users. That is, white people use drugs more than African Americans do on a percentage basis. And yet, African Americans make up more than 50% of the people in prison for drug crimes around this country. 50% versus 11%, right? The truth of the matter is that as bad as those racial disparities are, they are even worse here in the state of Florida, where African Americans make up about 16% of the population, 46% of the people serving time in prison today. Nationwide, it's about 12% and 35% of all prisoners are African American nationwide. Here in Florida, 16% and 46% of prisoners are African American. More than 60% of the people in Florida prison today are people of color. That's a huge disparity. And I don't care who you are. I don't care where you come from. I don't care what your political party is. I don't care what your ideology is. We ought to be able to take a look at that massive disparity and say something has gone wrong. Something is amiss here. Something is not working. Maybe we'll disagree about the cause. Maybe we'll disagree about the solution. But by golly, we ought to at least be able to look at a disparity that wide and say something about this system is fundamentally broken to produce outcomes like that. You know, I think the thing that is causing that is racial disparities all up and down the system. We know that African Americans and people of color are more likely to be arrested, more likely to be charged with a crime when they are, more likely to be charged more harshly, more likely to be found guilty, and more likely to face stiffer sentences when they are. Every step of the process results in, magnifies, exacerbates these disparities. That's how you get to a disparity that wide. I think we just have to acknowledge that the system is broken. I think the question, what do we do about it, is the right question, right? What do we do about it? I think there are a bunch of things that we need to do. I want to highlight just two this evening that I think are particularly relevant in Florida. Again, at the statewide level. So in Florida, we have a rule that says that if you are in prison and have, good behavior is sort of the historical phrase that folks would use, the time off for good behavior. If you engage in activities that encourage rehabilitation, take an education class, take a job training class, things like that, you're eligible to have a portion of your time shaved off. In Florida, the maximum amount of time that you can have shaved off of your sentence is 15%, 15% of the total sentence. And in that, we lag far, 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 far behind other states including those around us in the South, not a region particularly known for being liberal commie pinko sympathizers. States have said that you can have up to 35% of your prison time shaved off. They call it the 85% rule. Here, in other places, it's 65%. Why is that important? First of all, if we did that, it would mean fewer people in prison. It would mean fewer people in prison today. And it would encourage rehabilitation. It would encourage folks to get the education and training and services that they need in order to be successful when they return to communities. Because guess what? People are returning to communities every single day. Most of the folks who are in prison, they're not staying there forever. They're staying there for long, unduly harsh periods, but they're not staying there forever. They're coming back. And all of us and our public safety is well served by making sure that folks get what they need to be rehabilitated. Shaving off this amount of time, turning it from 85% to 65% would go a long way towards doing that, and would save you, the taxpayer, about $870 million in the process, which could again be used for things like education, mental health, all of the services that we know that actually make communities safer at the front end rather than at the back end. That's especially true given, one of the points that was made before, which is what do you expect to happen in terms of recidivism? If someone comes back from being incarcerated and you've said, we're going to cut off your employment opportunities, we're going to say that you're not eligible for public services, public benefits, we're going to make it really hard for you to find housing, what do you think is going to happen? You ain't got to be a rocket scientist. You don't have to work up at Cape Canaveral to figure out what's likely to happen in a situation like that. You're likely to have folks return to patterns of behavior that are not helpful, especially if they can't get the other services they need to succeed. Because one of the untold stories of our criminal justice system, or at least undertold, is that so many of the folks who are serving time in prisons and especially in local jails have diagnosed mental health conditions, mental health and substance abuse problems. Those are things that are not best served, best treated by being in prison, but rather by getting actual medical treatment. I have yet to find a person who came out of prison more mentally healthy than they came in. And I, for one, don't think that being locked behind bars is the best treatment for mental illness under any circumstance. So if we did this thing where we made it so that folks could earn rehabilitation credit, we can take some of those savings to investing in the things that would actually make a difference, make our communities safer, and help people's lives in the meantime. The second area that I would highlight is really being, I should also mention that rule, the adjusting the 85% rule, there is a bill in the legislature right now. It's been introduced a few times before. This is the most expansive one they have this year. Absolutely something that folks should be in touch with their legislators about to support. But I would also echo the idea that so far Tallahassee has been a place where good ideas go to die and bad ideas go to thrive. The other thing that I would say, the other sort of solution that I think we could implement imminently is on this issue of bail and bail reform, which has already been mentioned a couple times. I do think that risk assessments are problematic. I think they've shown that, but I really do think that we need to transition away from monetary bail as much as possible. Right now, today, February 11th, 2021, there are probably 15,000 people in the state of Florida who are sitting in county jails, who have not been convicted of any crime, and who are only sitting in jail, incarcerated, because they do not have access to money to pay money bail. I think that's a gross injustice. I think it is morally wrong and something that we should strive mightily to fight back against. It's also an area where local elected officials have a great deal of discretion, have a lot that they can do to make that better. That's not something where we have to wait on Tallahassee. That's not something where we have to wait on Ron DeSantis. You're going to be waiting a long time if you expect him to do anything. This is an area where local elected officials can really do something, make a difference, and they should. So Those are two areas that I think are sort of immediately actionable. They're not going to be enough. They're not going to be sufficient to fix the overall system because it is fundamentally broken, but they're a good start. The last thing I want to say, we started out by saying how much we love Michelle Alexander, how much we love the book, The New Jim Crow. All of that is true. I'll tell you my one problem with Michelle Alexander, my one problem with the book, I call it the article problem, because I don't like the article that she uses, the new Jim Crow, the article, right? I think it is a new Jim Crow, not the singular, not the exclusive, not the only. I think there are some folks who have convinced themselves that the only place that racism and racial disparity show up in this country is in the criminal justice system. That is wrong, and it's unfair to the people who work in that system, many of whom work very hard at the jobs that they do. It ascribes blame only to them rather than to the entire structure, the entire country that we live in, where there are a bunch of new Jim Crows. You solve racism in the criminal justice system, you've done something good, but you've only solved racism in the criminal justice system at that point. You still got to solve it in housing and economics and voting and jobs and education and everything else. So don't think of it as the new Jim Crow, think of it as a new Jim Crow, and think of the work that we have to do to ease disparities all up and down the state every day, every way, in every which way.
Thank you, Micah. I don't know, that was wonderful as always.
I'm gonna applaud.
So,
You don't get much applause on Zoom.
yeah. There was a question from Dana, the bill number you were talking about?
I'd have to look it up. I forgot. It's introduced by Senator Perry, who is incidentally a Republican. So to the point made before about sort of cross ideological work here, but I'd have to look at that. There's so many bill numbers and they all run together.
Well, I have a question about a bill number that you didn't mention, but it fits right into using the indefinite article, and I think it's bill number 1, which is to criminalize protest. I don't know, Dave, if you know about that. I mean, I think it is supposed to be responding to the riot at the Capitol on January 6th, but that's the pretext. It's designed to criminalize Black Lives Matter and other protests. Can anyone speak to that?
I can. It is HB1. It is a terrible, horrible, rotten, no good, lousy, garbage bill. It is a bill that effectively criminalizes protests. It chills First Amendment rights. It basically says that if you show up at a protest, at an event, and someone, somewhere decides that it was disruptive, then everyone who was there can get charged with a felony, can be sentenced to things that are higher than the sentences that we give for assault and sexual assault. And you don't actually have to engage in the disruptive activity yourself to be charged and sentenced. It says just if someone there does something bad, then you're able to be charged as well. It also gives immunity to folks who decide they want to run over you with a car, for example. It protects Confederate monuments more than they currently are. And let's be clear that although the governor has now tried to repurpose this as a response to the events of January 6th, he introduced it, he talked about it back in September. No one knew about January 6th at that point. He was very clear then that it was about protests that he himself does not like, that he himself disagrees with, especially the Black Lives Matter protests. That's what it's about. Don't let him con you into believing that it's about January 6th, because it's not. And it really is part of a broader pattern from the governor of trying to stifle dissent from people who disagree with him, to try and avoid criticism, to try and avoid robust discussion on issues that he doesn't agree with. I think it is a morally abhorrent bill. He should be ashamed for introducing it. I feel icky just being in the same room with a piece of paper that has the thing printed on it. It's that bad.
You have to have a sense of shame first, though, to be ashamed, I think. Nancy had a question, and it's really kind of the key issue tonight. Given the makeup of the state legislature, what can we do? I heard somebody, one of our candidates for the city commission explained his support for Mike Caruso, who's a Republican, on the grounds that as between him and Jim Bonfiglio, a good Democrat, that Bonfiglio could get nothing done in Tallahassee, and that the best hope for getting something done was sending Mike Caruso. The problem is, I guess, that, you know, Republicans enforce party discipline much better than Democrats, and when they passed State Bill 7066, gutting Amendment 4, he was one of, you know, every single Republican that that voted in favor of it. I don't know if it's because he really believes that the bill was needed, or because, you know, he was told that he needed to support it. So what can we do in that kind of, other than try to elect more Democrats? But it's a heavy lift.
I would just add to that, although, you know, I have been a loyal Democrat all my life. We have Democrats who have, you know, brought forward legislation that only furthers the issue. This is not necessarily a party line issue. We have, you know, what Micah said about Senator Perry. Senator Perry has is quite conservative Republican from Central Florida, but he's also been involved in reentry projects, and that is what has opened his eyes to things. So I wouldn't say this is necessarily a partisan bill. You know, and this is, you know, I talk to Democratic legislators all the time about bills they're introducing that enhance penalties, that send more people to jail for longer periods of time. So I think we have to talk to our legislators about what is their position on criminal justice reform, what are they willing to do about it, talk to them about bills that may be pending by Republicans, and try to get them to support those bills. Because that's how we'll make progress. And unfortunately, because of how the system is rigged, we're going to have Republicans, you know, running the show for a little while in Tallahassee. And so we need to be able to get behind when they have good legislation, irrespective of their party line. Senator Brandis is from Sarasota area. He's a Republican, and he has introduced some of the best criminal justice reform bills in the last, you know, that I've seen in the last 20 years. So I would just encourage us to look at the substance and then get everybody behind them.
The Amendment 4, that whole process was, you know, nonpartisan. I mean, that's how it played out, getting it passed, and the fact that 65% of Floridians voted in favor of it shows that it was nonpartisan. I don't know if that is dead in the water, you know, I mean, a bill, an amendment that that made clear that yes, some restitution or some fees, but that court fees and all of the additional fees that got glommed on in that bill, making it, you know, effectively gutting it, whether that has any chance of, you know, a new amendment that would clarify that. I don't know, Nancy, if you have any thoughts about that. I mean, is Desmond, is anybody, is that just a pipe dream?
Anyone can speak, so.
Dave, didn't you talk to Desmond today? Well, not to put you on the spot, but I heard you did.
Yeah, I talked today. In fact, 6 of us or 7 of us state attorneys got together today to talk about Amendment 4 and implementing criminal justice reform. And so that was productive. It was led by Miami-Dade's state attorney, Kathy Rundle, down there, because she was the first one to come forward with a plan to implement Amendment 4, despite the legislature's clear attempts to undermine the law. You know, in Palm Beach County, with Nancy's help and a group of others, were able, and Carrie Howard, we were able to come together to effectuate Amendment 4, to live up to the promise of Amendment 4, or at least try to, by allowing people who have costs and fees that are outstanding to have them bifurcated from their sentence. And we've done our part here locally. The problem is that the courts and the legislature have done their best to try to keep ex-felons from voting. This was a political ploy by Governor DeSantis and the Republican legislature. It was to try to stymie the will of the voters, and they got what they wanted in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. And so we are in a bit of a holding pattern. I mean, we're still doing what we're doing locally and trying to make a difference. But I mean, Carrie can tell you how many people have gone to her office to get their voting rights back. I don't know the number, but maybe Carrie can tell you that, because it's not many. It needs to be a lot more.
Yeah, Nancy actually works, we work with Nancy on it, so I don't have the number. But no, it is not nearly what it should have been. Where we did get, I mean, you know, progress, but this is, you know, to me kind of convoluted, is because of the money raised to, you know, there was a lot of money raised to pay the fees for ex-offenders that did end up clearing their record. Now, I don't think we know how many of those then ultimately registered to vote. So that's sort of the other issue.
Yeah, of
Dave.
course, as has been said before, though, that's only part of what you face as a returning citizen. Even getting your vote back still doesn't get you a license to cut hair or anything else for that matter, and you really need to do the whole thing. But on a slightly different twist, another state, I think it was Virginia, just voted to legalize recreational marijuana. And I don't know what can be done to simply blot out the convictions of everyone who was simply prematurely correct. And I think, you know, I don't know if Biden can pardon, you know, everyone on federal charges, but you know, there's got to be some way of going at that, you know, to just retroactively say, no, you weren't ever convicted of a crime. I exonerated, I don't know what the legal terms are. I mean, is there any hope of proceeding anywhere along those lines? By lines, I didn't mean cocaine. I meant.
Not that I know of. And I would just, you know, one of the things I think we see in what Micah said about monetary bail, and this goes to these minor offenses like, you know, possession of marijuana. People get jailed on it. Poor people who can't bond out plead guilty to it. And so that's how then we keep this sort of records stacking up, right? They can't come up with $1,000 to get out of jail, so they plead guilty, get out of jail, and now they have a criminal conviction. So the next time they're in jail, it's that much more serious, and it just keeps going. You know, the issue also with Amendment 4 and the fines and fees is we have so exponentially increased the costs to people who are in the criminal justice system in terms of court costs and all, that it is really insurmountable for poor people.
In terms of reform of drug laws, I'll just give a plug to meeting. I had asked Mark Schneider of the Palm Beach County, president of the Palm Beach County chapter of the ACLU of Florida, about possibly appearing tonight, you know, as a backup if Micah couldn't make it. And Mark or actually has done a dog and pony show, he refers to it, with Lenny Gross. I don't know Lenny Gross, but they have a debate on legalizing all drugs, you know, right down to crack, heroin, everything is legal. And Bill Buckley back in the 60s and 70s was in favor of it. So, you know, it's, I mean, it comes under the rubric of, you know, you should be able to do what you want to yourself as long as you don't, you know, hurt me, you know. And if somebody wants to become a drug addict and is not robbing people or mugging people to get the money for the drugs, of course, I guess the other side is that it's not a good environment for some kid to grow up in. So
But
anyway.
that's where it's a public health issue rather than a criminal justice issue. I think we're going to be able to see, didn't Oregon do that? Haven't they now legalized all drug use? So I think it's going to be very interesting to at least be able to say in a year, has crime increased, have these things increased, and have some real data to be able to support legalization issues.
Yeah, I want to say something. We were talking earlier about a pathway about people that were formerly incarcerated being integrated back into society. In New York, there was an organization called the Fortune Society. It was started by David Rothenberg. I don't know if you people are familiar. And they actually, you know, had funding, and they had an actual building where ex-felons could live, and they helped them secure jobs. They got clothing for them. They helped them with job interviews. So, you know, and that was something that maybe could be done here, something similar to that.
There are some people, a guy who on another Zoom, the In Crowd, which is a group that I'm involved with. I don't know if any of you know about it. Yeah, the In Crowd. There's a guy on there who was incarcerated, and he started a group, and he's doing stuff in West Palm Beach. So some things are happening, but having a building and actually, you know, actually working with people hands-on and helping them, that would be wonderful.
I'll just say real quick, we actually do have a pretty good re-entry process in Palm Beach County. We started it about, gosh, now 20 years ago. It has grown into, we got a county department now devoted to re-entry, and we contract with various community services like the Lord's Place and Goodwill to help with housing and job training and those kinds of things. So, and we have statistics to show all of that works to prevent rearrest, right? It's just that, of course, there's not enough funding for everybody. And there is distrust of kind of the system and things that I think, much like we saw with the voting, trying to get folks to vote, is there's not necessarily a good sense that the system is there for them. So
The Lord,
but we do some good stuff in Palm Beach County. In fact, we're kind of recognized nationally for our reentry efforts. We just
the
need to.
Lord's Place, which has participated in All People's Day. We had some people come to some of our meetings ahead of time, and some of the people who were incarcerated, they were Black people. They were, very interested, people connected to them, and they were open about who they were. And that's more important, because people say, oh my God, someone went to jail. Ooh, we don't want to talk to them. And they came to our meetings, and the people got to know them a little bit, and it was a good thing. Those kinds of things have to keep happening.
Yeah, on a personal level.
Huh?
Bob Avarak had a question for everyone. I don't know that there's an answer to it, because I don't know that they really care, but the question was, what technique, if any, are the authors of House Bill 1 using to insulate this bill from obvious First Amendment problems?
Lies, gaslighting, generally just being jerks. Like there's no real like legal strategy behind it, other than to sort of pretend that it says something that it doesn't, or to insist that the people who say that this is problematic are crazy and exaggerating things. But basically lies, mendacity. That's the major strategy.
Mhm.
And making it the governor's priority. So
Right.
there is a sense that you can't go against it.
Well, there's a certain irony to the fact that Donald Trump was only exercising his First Amendment rights when he incited a riot. But if this bill passes and you go to a protest and someone 5 blocks away from you hits a policeman, you can end up going to jail.
Yeah, I mean, the question that I keep encouraging folks to ask the governor is, if he got his way and this bill was passed, and this had happened in Florida, would he charge Donald Trump with a crime? And so far, no one has been willing to ask him the question. So I'm going to keep on saying it until maybe somebody does. But answer the question. Like, I'd like to know, right? Because if the answer is no, then that tells you everything you need to know about the political motivation behind it. You can have different ideas on what the law should be or not, but if you can't answer the question and say what you would do, then that tells you everything you need to know about the political motivation behind it, and that it's not really about public safety. It's about intimidating people you don't agree with.
Right.
And apparently we can understand anger for Trump losing that is sufficient to cause people to have violent reactions, but we can't understand anger that may result in violence after, decades and centuries of racism.
Yeah, but I remember, the first time we went to a protest, and instead of being able to go where we wanted to go, you were put in a metal pen. This was the official protest zone, 8 blocks from where we were supposed to be.
All right.
And the court said, "Oh, fine. You're right. You have your right to exercise. You're over on 12th Avenue by the river.
Right.
Instead of anywhere near the UN or anywhere. So I don't think they have too much to worry about from the courts right now."
Yeah. Right. June, you got to unmute, June. You got to unmute, June.
I did.
Yeah, there we go.
There you go.
Okay, thank you. This question is really to any of these wonderful speakers. One of the things that's concerned me for years, which you've already addressed, are the impediments to a successful reentry. And I don't know if this is specific to Florida, but in Florida, if you've been charged, but the case has been dismissed, or I'm not sure of the second part. If you were arrested and not found guilty, I don't know about that part. But if the case is dismissed, that's still part of the public record.
Somebody
So
asked.
that when prospective landlords do a background check, they'll find this out and dismiss you out of hand, but you haven't done anything wrong. And the same thing is true, you know, for jobs and so forth. So I don't know if that's specific to Florida, but to me that it's just incomprehensible that you are going to continue to be punished. You haven't done anything wrong. Is there anything we can do about that? Guess not.
Well, I'm happy to answer. I just feel like I didn't want to, I was waiting for somebody else to jump in. So Florida has very strict rules for being able to expunge your record. And if you do have any sort of prior conviction, and it can be for marijuana, but it is on your record, it prevents you from ever getting any other later arrests that, like you said, are dismissed off your record. And so that is an issue and a problem. They passed a statute, gosh, now it might be close to 2 years ago, Dave, maybe you remember, about trying to have more widely available expungement of records that of cases that were dismissed, where people, you know, were clearly innocent, that it would occur automatically, but FDLE, it was left up to FDLE, and that process has not gotten underway.
Could I ask a question, Michael?
Yeah, please.
It's Chris. First of all, thank you to Dave and Carrie and Micah. I learned so much tonight. I really appreciate their time. I have a question about the number of hate groups in Florida. I support the Southern Poverty Law Center, and every year they come out with this beautiful publication that analyzes it. And guess which state leads the nation in number of hate crime? Yay! Okay, anyway, a recent article in the Sun Sentinel, they've set up shop. One of them has set up shop on Clematis Street.
Yeah.
Can I ask the panel, please, any or all, what can we do about this? How can we allow them to have their right to speak when we really would just really like to choke them? So
If I could say something on that. That hate group is no longer on Clematis Street. They violated the terms of their lease. The landlord kicked them out immediately as soon as the article came out. They weren't located there physically. They were a virtual tenant, which meant it was a address, mail drop, but they lied in their application, didn't say who they really were, and the landlord got rid of them. The sheriff here is the head of the terrorism task force. There's a regional whole task force on terrorist threats, international, domestic, and he is the head for the entire region, which is rare for someone from Palm Beach County. Usually it's a Miami-based position, but so we have a lot of surveillance, and there's, you know, the groups are known to law enforcement, and like I said, that one group is no longer there. And although there is broad First Amendment rights, and we learned that with the impeachment trial going on, that, you know, you can use inflammatory speech, and unless it's intentionally designed to incite immediate lawless conduct, and it's likely to do so, then it does not become criminalized speech. So there's that exception under the Brandenburg rule with Supreme Court opinion, which says that pretty much most speech, even inflammatory speech, is okay. It becomes criminal once it incites immediate violence. Also, any actions that these groups take that are violent actions, you know, can be prosecuted immediately. But even before they're reported in the press, the law enforcement community knows about these groups and have their tabs on them. I'd like to apologize because I have to go, and I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that we can continue it. But I'm going to leave you in good hands with Micah and Carrie. They do an outstanding job. So thank you for having me here today,
Thank,
everyone.
thank you, Dave. Thanks so much for being on. I think we're close to wrapping up anyhow. So,
And we have to go also.
yeah. Are there any more questions, comments?
Be right up.
Let me thank Dave's gone. Carrie, it was wonderful presentation, and Micah, as always, thank you. And next meeting, as I said, it's always the second Thursday of the month. I don't know what it is in March, but a debate on
Second Thursday.
decriminalizing all drugs. So any more comments or questions? Then
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Great
thank you all
meeting.
for
Great-
being here
Great
too.
meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.
It's good to see you all after only months. 5, 4,
Yeah.
3, 2, 1.